Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 73.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have a great interview with Elizabeth Heaton. She is an educational consultant at College Coach, a great company out there that helps families understand and plan for college. And in this episode, we're going to talk quite a bit about the elite colleges, the Ivy League and some of their competitors, what it really takes to get accepted to these types of schools, and then what to do if you're not quite at that caliber. Not everybody aspires to go to the Ivy League, but they may want to go to one of their competitors. But oftentimes, families are going to have to make that tough decision and say, the Ivy League just aren't appropriate for our student. What can we do? What are some of our other options? We talk a little bit about, the next tier down of schools and ways to get the most out of our visits and understanding what we're doing and how we're doing it. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this great interview. As always, we have show notes available at Taming the High Cost of College /73 for episode number 73. So we do mention some great resources. That's all available in the show notes. You don't need to be taking notes while you're driving or exercising. So you can go to our website and get that information. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the interview. And when it's all over, I'll talk a bit about some of my thoughts as well. All right, today I'm sitting down with Elizabeth Heaton. She's a vice president and an educational consultant at College Coach. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, Brad. How are you?
I am doing great. It's great to have you today.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be here.
All right, so you spend a lot of time helping families understand kind of the admissions process and the whole gamut of how to get into a school, what schools you should pursue, and that kind of stuff. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to do what you do?
Sure. I am a former admissions officer at the University of Pennsylvania. And actually, before I worked at Penn, I was an alumni interviewer for my alma mater for about 10 years. And I just thought that the admissions world was fascinating. And when I was looking to make a career change, I decided to make that my career. And while I was at Penn, I read about 1,300 files a year and represented those students to selection committee. And I also chaired selection committee, so I was making final admit decisions. And the things that struck me when I was there is you had this really qualified, incredibly impressive group of students applying, and yet they made so many silly mistakes that torpedoed their applications in many cases. And so when I was looking for my next step, I thought I'd like to be in a position where I could be helping those students and families to avoid making those silly mistakes. And that's really what College Coach is all about, not just avoiding silly mistakes, but helping families to understand how colleges review applications, the things that tend to help a student stand out, and the things that can sometimes hold the student back. And that's really what we're about. We're about helping families understand what really goes on the other side of the curtain and help them put their best foot forward in the application process and find their best fit schools.
Okay, well, great. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that obviously you work quite a bit on. So you mentioned Penn, which is obviously one of the Ivy League. So let's start there. Let's start the most elite schools. If that's something that's on our radar and we're considering it, what would a parent do? Let's say you're a parent of a sophomore or junior and they're talking Harvard or Yale or, again, one of the elite schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just getting started. So obviously there's lots of rumors out there about, how tough it is to get in and what people should do. And where would you start if you were, again, at the very beginning and you're just thinking about it?
Well, probably one of the first things I do is make sure you have a balanced list because it is very difficult to get in. I mean, places like Stanford and Harvard have acceptance rates that fall in some cases below 5%. So you really do have to imagine that as talented and as wonderful as your student is, the likelihood is very, very high that they're not going to make the cut. Doesn't mean they couldn't do the work, doesn't mean that they are not wonderful students with great accomplishments. It just means that there are a lot of other students who are really great with great accomplishments, and it's just there are only so many spots and a lot of competition for those spots. So probably the very first thing I would do is really take an honest look at your child and your child's accomplishments. The kinds of so almost prerequisites would be stellar academic performance across the board. And that generally means straight A's. Is there room for a B or two? Sure, there is. When you start showing a C or two, that's probably not going to be useful and probably going to mean that the student is going to be really less likely to get accepted. It's not just about doing well in class, though. It's also about the rigor of the curriculum that the student chooses. So again, at the most selective levels, the expectation is that the student is challenging him or herself in the most rigorous curriculum available and doing extraordinarily well in that curriculum. And that really does start in 9th grade. So if you have a child who's a junior and they haven't really challenged themselves yet, the opportunity to kind of go back and redo things doesn't exist. So you might be thinking more along the lines of perhaps the elite opportunities are better for graduate school, because students who are looking at the Ivies really need to have been thinking about it almost from the beginning. The other thing is, of course, really great test scores. These are an important component at most of the highly selective institutions. You're not going to get away from them, and the expectation on those is high as well. And so what I would say is that really a minimum score on the ACT would be something like a 33, but really to be in the mix, you want to be more like a 34, 35, and that's out of 36. On the SAT, in the current version of the SAT, you are looking at probably about a 750 across the board in all 3 sections. Is a really good place to be, 750 or above. I would say the absolute bare minimum would be about a 700 in each section of the SATs. And like I said, you're really in a much better place if you're at the more like your child is more at the 750 or above level. And then a lot of those schools require subject tests. Those were called achievement tests back in the day when I took them, but they're basically hour-long tests offered also by the College Board, which is the same company that offers the SAT. And they're in different subject areas, and most schools ask for 2 of those, and you're really looking at the same score expectations. So that's the quantitative side of things. So if you already can see that there are potentially holes in your students' sort of quantitative record, then that's probably an indication that maybe the most elite schools are not necessarily going to be a possibility or an option. Are there exceptions? Absolutely, there are. And certainly there are students who colleges are really interested in having on their campus and for whom those grades and test score expectations might be slightly less, but I really want to emphasize the slightly. They're not dropping a full 100-point expectations. Nor are they dropping a whole grade expectation. So really the quantitative piece really does need to be there. But because so many students in those applicant pools are really outstanding academic students, the place where really decisions get made is on the qualitative elements. And those include what counselors and teachers say about the student in their letters of recommendation, what the students say about themselves in their essays, and then probably super important, what they're involving themselves in outside of the classroom. And those, generally speaking, if you're looking at the most selective levels, it usually goes beyond just being your standard run-of-the-mill, great all-around student and, play a sport, write for the newspaper, kind of your average high school student. That's great. But I would say that the students who tend to be most successful at the highly selective level tend to be a little bit more lopsided in the things that they do. So they may be involved in different elements, but there may be one area that's really emerged as a particular strength. A phrase that we like to use at College Coach is something that we stole from Harvard, and that's called distinguishing excellence. So when they're talking about students around the committee table it's something that they ask about, what's his or her DE. And so we talk about the importance of developing a DE. And the reality is that not all kids can have a DE, and not all kids have something that they're passionate about or good enough at that it really can emerge. And so for that reason, again, it really kind of narrows the pool of students who are really going to tend to leap out at the highly selective level.
Right. I guess in examples that I've talked with people about, again, maybe if you could corroborate my theory here, because you're much more in tune to this than I am. But I guess what I tell people is they're looking for, again, that distinguishing, what do you call it, characteristic?
Distinguishing excellence, yeah.
Distinguishing excellence. Okay, so what I tell people is you kind of look at what your distinguishing excellence is, and then realize that if somebody can trump you, that's the challenge that you're up against. So if you're first chair in your high school band, well, that's great. But at a place like Harvard, they're talking about people that are playing with the MSO or child prodigies in music. And if there's enough of those type of applicants, you're going to slide down the list, even if you've got strong numbers. Or if you're into acting, being part of the school play is great, but a lot of the child actors and so forth that they're, have actually been on TV or been on Broadway or those types of things. And so I always encourage people to kind of think that's the kind of way that you need to think at some of these elite colleges. Now, if your distinguishing excellence is not, if there isn't others that have your distinguishing excellence, then maybe you can go a little bit lesser. But again, if you have an Eagle Scout, that's great. If somebody else says, well, I've been involved in Scouts and I founded a troop and I did all kinds of things well beyond just an Eagle Scout, that's what some of these schools are looking for.
Yeah, I would absolutely corroborate that. I think that's very accurate. One thing I do want listeners to be aware of is that certainly I think that last example you gave was a good one, where you have a student who's an Eagle Scout but kind of really went above and beyond just doing that. The other examples are a little extreme, but certainly there are going to be students who fit that bill in those applicant pools. But the idea is, if you're going to be involved in something, you need to be involved in it in a lot of different ways, and things like founding your own club so some examples I could give of students who I've worked with who've been successful at that most elite level would be a student who was really passionate about the environment and was trying to get others passionate about saving the environment, and recognized that the way to get people involved was to kind of get them when they were young. And so she created a program for elementary school students that she went out and taught at her local elementary school. And then she got another group of students to bring it to elementary schools near them. That's the kind of, it's great to be in your school's environmental club, and she was in that as well, but she really saw a need and then created something to address that need. That's the kind of thing that can really stand out. Another student was a great debater, and he was the top debater in his school, and then he began to compete in national competitions, and he was actually the national champion in his style of debate. So it usually goes beyond just achievement at the high school level into something a little more than that. And those are the kinds of things that stand out. And it could also be playing a sport so well that you're ready to start as a freshman. That's a distinguishing excellence as well. The colleges are really, especially at the very elite level, their goal is to put together the most interesting and diverse class that they can. And diversity, people, when they think about diversity, tend to think kind of in narrow terms about things like race and ethnicity. But diversity extends to geography. They want students from all over the country and the world. Certainly it was a focus for us at Penn to have at least one student in every freshman class from every state in the union, and then as many different countries as we could have. We thought that added a diversity of perspective that was useful. These colleges want diversity of socioeconomic sort of situations. So they don't want to fill their classes with just wealthy students. They wanted to have students who had other backgrounds. But they really, almost more than anything, wanted diversity of interests and experiences and activities. And so that's where the whole what are you doing outside of the classroom really came into play.
Right. And I guess that was actually my next question, and I guess you've kind of confirmed it. But another thing that I tell people is they need musicians and actors and math geeks and leaders and followers and politicians and all kinds of different things when they're forming a class. And again, they're trying to find the top in those areas and kind of build their class. But so if you happen to be in a crowded area for a particular applicant pool at a particular school for a particular year, the standard may be really high. Conversely, if it happens to be a low, it's not that crowded that particular year, then maybe you can get in with quote unquote lesser statistics. But I guess one last comment I'd like to point out, and then we'll move on to the next topic. But I was doing is either a Quora or a Reddit thread that I was reading, and it essentially said, I had perfect test scores and I was accepted at this elite school, but I was denied at these 5 elite schools. And how many other people with perfect test scores have been, denied at these schools? And there was a long list of comments and follow-ups from people from recent applicants to people that, said they had strong test scores 10 and 20 years ago that did not get accepted, even though they had perfect test scores at elite schools. Would you collaborate that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the key to what I was sharing earlier is that you have a very large group of students with great test scores and great grades and great rigor in their curriculum. So those pieces are just not the things that set you apart. It's certainly impressive when a student has perfect test scores, but not one time ever around the committee table did we ever use as a reason for admitting a student, well, she's got perfect testing. And I can tell you that my colleagues would weigh in and share the exact same thing. Or as a reason for admitting, well, she's valedictorian. Those are not reasons to admit. Those are great pieces of a strong application, but in and of themselves, those are not why you admit a student. And there's one other thing that actually you hit on there, where the student shared that, well, I got into this elite school, but I got denied from these 5. And the thing that's really important for families to keep in mind is, first of all of these schools are very different. It's the rare student, and we do hear about it, and unfortunately when you hear about that, people think that it's a great idea to apply to all of them, but who will apply to all of the elite schools, let's say all of the Ivies, and get into all of them. And the reason that that's incredibly rare and almost never happens is because each school has a very different personality and thing that they're looking for, and they also have a different applicant pool every year. So, what stands out at Penn in a particular year, and we're saying, yes, this is a kid we want, may not stand out at Cornell in that same year. And they may say, oh, well, we've got 300 kids who look just like this one, and we've already admitted a couple of them, and this isn't something that's interesting to us this year. So it's a fallacy to imagine that if you are just because you're competitive or you get admitted to one, that somehow you should have also gotten admitted to the rest, because they're all looking for different things and they also have different students to choose from.
Okay, great. So let's say that based on what we've just learned today, and there's probably some parents out there that have said, oh, didn't realize it was that competitive. Maybe Harvard isn't a reality for us. So let's talk a little bit about the top, and I don't know what it might be, and this is where I'm looking for some help. So obviously the Ivy League kind of compete with each other, and they're all at that level, but there's probably, 10 or 20 more schools that would kind of be in that caliber, although technically not an Ivy League school?
Mm-hmm.
Is that seem accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there are, you certainly have the Ivies, right? Are there 10 or 12 others that are that selective? Not even. I think we're talking about a really, one of the challenges when you talk about highly selective schools and highly selective admissions is that people who listen and say, well, my kid has got nothing that sounds like any of that. Is he even going to go to school? And I've had conversations with parents who are saying, well, my son is a B student. I keep telling him he's not even going to get into college. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. 79% of all colleges in this country accept more students than they turn away every year. So they are eager to welcome all different types of students with all different types of achievements. only about, let's see, I do the math in my head, only about 21% are accepting less than half of their applicant pool, and only a very small percentage of those are at that level that we've been talking about, where you really need to be fairly extraordinary. Even just dropping down slightly, I would say that students who have a legitimate shot at an Ivy are going to have likely lots of choices amongst other schools. And then students who maybe are not quite measuring up to what we're discussing in terms of Ivy expectations are similarly going to have a pretty nice selection of colleges to choose from. I think the challenge becomes that people tend to focus on the same sort of 200 or so schools that crop up in my hated U.S. News and World Report rankings, because I think that there's so much we could spend a whole show talking about what's not good about those rankings. And as a result, they get a little too focused on a name brand and falling in love with schools that are, just going to be a lot harder to get into. So going back to where we started, are there 10 to 12 that fit that Ivy? I would say not even. They're probably, I suppose if we start to think about liberal arts colleges and some of those, if we added it all up, there might be. You might be right. My gut instinct was to say, no, there aren't even that many, but you're probably right. But it really does, it does make up such a very tiny percentage of the colleges in this country. It just happens to be the schools that the media and some parents and students in schools tend to get really focused in on.
Right, exactly. And just to be clear, that where the schools land, there's kind of a continuum, and there's lots of opinions as to what order they belong in and that kind of stuff. But there is, the schools at the highly selective at the top. And then there is no magic line where you say all of a sudden, well, these 12 belong in that category, and then there's these 27 that are this next group. And there is no official way to divide up schools. Just realize that, there's a bunch of really selective ones at the top, and then there's some that are similar but not quite as selective, and then a little less selective than that, and then a little less selective than that, all the way down to schools that are not selective at all. And
exactly. Yep.
And where you fall on that. But I think it's important that parents realize, what do you say to parents that are saying, well, we're really, really focused on the Ivies. We really got to get into the Ivies. And in the back of your mind, you're looking at the statistics and saying, well, Ivies are possible, but not likely. What do you do then?
I do think one of the things that we talk about a lot at College Coach is finding the best fit school. I do think people get focused on prestige and can imagine that the prestige of the school therefore automatically makes it better. But really, we always have to start with the individual student and think about what are his or her accomplishments, what kinds of things does he or she enjoy doing, really taking a look at the student first. What are the areas of interest? What does she want to study? I can think about an example of a student who I was working with who really wanted to study business, was very focused on hands-on business rather than kind of a more theoretical approach to business. And he went to visit some colleges and by chance happened to go to Amherst, which is here in Massachusetts, and fits into that, sort of 10 or 12 additional schools who are fairly similarly selective to the Ivies. It's a small liberal arts college, a great school. And he came back, and Amherst had not been on his list. But he came into my office and said, it is the perfect place for me. I loved everything about it. And that's where I think I want to go next year. And he was reasonably competitive, but he missed something super important, which is that Amherst at the time did not offer a hands-on business program. So his only opportunity to study in the area that he wanted was really to study econ, which was going to be very theoretical. So I really try to get parents and students thinking about the whole purpose of college, which is not to go to Yale, but to go and get an education and to explore some areas of interest, and then earn a degree with which you can then, sort of either go on to grad school or go on to the working world and find a career that you love. The idea that going to an Ivy guarantees that you will find a career that you love is a total, utter fallacy. I graduated from Ivy League institution, and entered into a career that I really disliked for 10 years. And I have, certainly friends who went to Ivies who are very happy in the things that they do, and then friends who went to Ivies who are very unhappy. All types of different levels of success. So the other thing I try to talk to families about is, what is the focus on the Ivy all about? Are you thinking that that's the only way your child can be successful? Well, meet my husband, who went to a local branch of our state institution here in Massachusetts, and who is more successful than I am if we're judging that by monetary terms. Is it that you think that your child can't get into graduate school? Well, guess what? Graduate schools are as equally focused on diversity and having students from all over as undergraduates. So going to Dartmouth does not mean that you will suddenly be a more successful applicant to medical school. And in fact, you're probably going to have a lot more competition coming out of Dartmouth for those spots available in medical school than you might if you went to the Michigan State, where maybe fewer students are as focused on it, and perhaps you might get more attention because you'll be a bigger fish at that pond, and therefore you might have your pick of medical institutions when it's time to apply. So I really try to get down to the core of what is the focus on the Ivy League about, helping them understand the realities of acceptance into that level school, and helping them understand what maybe some options are that are a little bit more likely. One thing about a student who has a shot at that most selective level is that that student will tend to be fairly competitive for a lot of other schools. And oftentimes those will be schools that people have heard of and can also get kind of excited about, and ideally go and visit and see what they have to offer. So they don't necessarily give up the dream of the Ivy, but they also accept that there are other options out there.
Absolutely.
They may not, they may tell me that they accept it and they may not really accept it, but when the process is done, I do find that they accept it.
Right. And I think it has a lot more to do with what students actually do while they're in school. I've done a number of podcasts where people, talk about the concept of applying yourself at school and taking advantage of what's available there, like the alumni office and the placement office and the study abroad programs and the research opportunities as an undergrad and the clubs and organizations where if you plug yourself in at any college, you're probably going to be further ahead than if you just attend a college and do the minimum so you get your diploma. Exactly.
I mean, it is really all about what you take advantage of. And you can see there are a long list of very successful people, and surely some of them have attended Ivies and many of them have not, went to their local state institution, which, by the way, is what most people do, and have thrived in their careers. So it really is about what you take advantage of while you're there. The other thing to keep in mind is, I won't name the school, but I have a student who's currently enrolled at one of the most selective schools in the country, an Ivy, and she's been very frustrated because in her first 3 years in school, she really couldn't get any attention from the Career Services Office. They were very focused on the seniors and helping the seniors get jobs, but she was looking for assistance in getting internships and doing interesting summer things during her undergraduate years, before she was a senior, and really found there was almost zero support for that. Whereas if she had attended a small liberal arts college, she might have found that they were thrilled to help her with that, and she might have gotten considerably more support and potentially done more interesting things during her time. So is she coming out with a wonderful name on her diploma? Absolutely. Do I think she thinks that it's been the best possible experience ever just because of the name? No, I wouldn't say that. I don't know that she regrets her choice, but I think we need to be careful in our assumptions that the best name necessarily equals the best experience or the most opportunity, because that is definitely not always the case.
Yeah. So if we are interested in, in the elites and or maybe some of their competition, or maybe taking a step or even 2 steps down, the whole process kind of starts with visit. So if I've got a a junior probably now, maybe even a sophomore, and we're looking at visiting the various colleges. How do we, give us some strategies to compare if we've been to a Harvard and obviously they're relatively impressive and lots of people visit Harvard just because they have no intention to applying. They just happen to be in the neighborhood. So it's almost a tourist destination.
Right.
How do you, avoid or maybe you don't avoid the prestige or the glamour of it all and cut to the chase of what you really need to be looking for?
Well, I think it starts with making a list of what is really most important to the student. So what does the school have to have? My student who fell in love with Amherst probably never even should have visited, given his strong feelings about studying business. And by the way, he ended up at a very business-focused school. He did not even end up applying to Amherst. So if you start with that, these are some things that a college campus must have. And these are some programs that the college must have. That's always the ideal place to start. I will say many students really don't know what they want to study. And I think that that's fine. I do find that students who are very focused on what they want to study, often that's because they think they have to be, or, they want to study medicine because their parents are doctors or it's a clear path, or they're going to be lawyers because I know what I have to do. I go to undergrad and then I go to law school and then I get a job and it's easy.
Right.
Most students really don't know what they want to study, but
Right.
They might have some inkling of the things that they're interested in. So starting by making that list. The other thing I would recommend is, you mentioned, you happen to be in Cambridge and so you visit Harvard because why not? And I actually think that's a great strategy to employ, especially when your kids are younger. If you're going to be on vacation, you're going to be in an area where there is a college or university. Most of these colleges are wide open. You can go, you can stroll on campus. You could even take a tour if you wanted to, but you certainly wouldn't have to do anything formal. The more colleges students are exposed to, the better a sense they tend to get of what they want in their college setting, big, small, a place where there's going to be a really tight-knit community, or a place that's in a city where the city is really the campus. So visiting as many schools as possible along the way, not necessarily taking, time and energy to visit 40 schools, but more, hey, we're going to be on vacation in Florida, let's check out Florida State while we're there, type of thing. And then also visiting your local schools. What I tell my students, I want you to check out these 5 schools that are in your backyard. A lot of them roll their eyes at the idea, and I'm very clear. It's not about, are you going to go to these schools? It's really about, this one is a big school in the middle of a city. This is a small school in the middle of a city. This is a small school in a suburb. This is a medium-sized school in a suburb. This is a large state university in a more rural area. Check these out. Doesn't cost you much, just the gas to get there. And it gives you a sense for, boy, I really like a big school, but I prefer that it be on its own campus rather than in the middle of a city. And now you're starting to narrow your options down. So the better a sense the student has of what they want. And also, this is where you come in, but what can you afford? If you're not going to qualify for financial aid and you really are dependent on maybe merit scholarships, well, you probably shouldn't even look at the Ivies because they don't offer any merit scholarships. So really understanding what is important from the family perspective. And then also, it's really important not just to visit the reach schools. It's easy to fall in love with the reach schools. For whatever reason, people love the things that they can't have. And I encourage students to fall in love with their matches and their safeties as well, because there shouldn't be on a school on the list that the student applies to that they are wouldn't be excited about attending.
Right. From a financial perspective, I always tell parents, my ideal situation is that you apply to 5 or 6 schools and you love them all equally. So that it just boils down to, well, this one's the lowest price. They're all wonderful. So we'll go to the one that's the lowest price. The reality of it, of course, is you tend to have favorites. And sometimes the favorites come in at the best price, sometimes not. So then parents are in this decision mode of, is it worth an extra $10,000 a year to go to this school instead of that school? Or is it worth $20,000? Or is it worth $3,000? And most parents have some sort of breaking point where if it's within a few $1,000s, they'll pick the one they really like. If it's
Right.
$25,000 different, that might sway the decision just based on finances.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. Most kids and often parents end up falling in love with a school or two, and that can make things a little more challenging. But even when they do fall in love and it doesn't work out, the thing that almost always happens if a student has done a really good job of putting that list together to begin with, and they really do like most schools on the list, is that whatever school they wind up at, that they wind up saying, I couldn't imagine being somewhere else. This is really, I'm very happy here, and I'm glad it worked out the way it did. I work with someone who aspired to an Ivy, didn't get in, was, as she described it, very unhappy in her first couple of weeks, and palled around with a group of kids who also had been turned down from the same Ivy. It was a school that was a little easier to get into, but very similar to the Ivy that she didn't get into. And ultimately, she had an amazing time, met her husband, would never change anything about it. So, that is the reality. But going back to what you were saying about how do you determine whether a school is really a good fit when you're visiting versus kind of just like, oh, it's got a great name. I mentioned that putting that list of criteria together, then also thinking about how do you make the most of your visit. You want to plan these in advance. If you're going to spend money and time to actively go to college campuses with that purpose, and it's not just something you're doing because you're going on vacation. And ideally, a really engaged student, might want to meet with a department head if they have a specific area of interest, or try to set up a meeting with someone in the department to talk through what that department's focus is, because you could be really interested in, let's say, psychology, but if your primary area of interest in psychology is abnormal psych, and the college only offers 2 classes in abnormal psych, it's probably not going to be a great fit. There might be 3 colleges out there with really big abnormal psych departments. And you can find that information out on the school's websites. There's so much great information on those websites. You can look at professors, what they do their research in. You can look at class catalogs and see what kind of courses are available. Again, for the student who doesn't really know what he or she wants to study, maybe there are activities that he or she want to get involved in. And so you're going to be looking for, do they have those student groups on campus? I always recommend, if you're liking the college while you're there, go off book. Don't just do the information session and the official guided tour, which are good, but walk around on your own. Eat in the dining hall. Pick up the student newspaper. Look at the things that are posted on the bulletin boards and maybe written in chalk on the sidewalks. Look at the other students that are there. Is this a place that feels like you would fit? And why? You need to be able to articulate that. A lot of families who are very focused on the most selective schools, I often will find that they can't always articulate why they liked a school. They just liked it because it has a great name. So I really push my kids to kind of dig in a little bit more. Why do you like this school? Or conversely, why don't you like this school? And if you're really, being honest with yourself, taking an honest look at who your student is, taking an honest look at your finances and being honest about what you really can afford, being honest about why you really like something is such an important piece of this process, because without it, you're basing your decisions on some, on a lack of truthfulness and really just a desire to have something that you think you want because everybody else seems to want it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always make a joke with parents and say that, your first visit for some students, it's their first college, and they look around and they say, oh, I really love it. Mom and dad aren't going to be here. Look at all these kids having fun on the quad. Sign me up. And then you do the second tour and kind of the same thing. Like, wow, this looks like lots of fun too. Sign me up here too. And then you ask that question, well, which one did you like better? It's like, oh, that's right. I can only go to one. How do I choose? Well, I like the first one better because the tour guide was cute. Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
That's maybe not a good reason. Certainly not one I want to tell my parents about. Why did I like the first one better? I think for a lot of families, it's getting some of that visit practice in, even potentially. I have a conundrum that I hear a lot. It's the kind of the chicken or the egg. And and I'm sure you hear too is, well, we don't know where to visit because we don't know what the student likes. and therefore we're not visiting. And then from the student's perspective is I don't know what I like because I haven't seen anything.
Yep.
For a lot of families, you just have to go visit some random schools just to get a baseline so that they can say, I've been to that big school and big schools are off the list, or I've been to the urban school and I'd much rather have rural or whatever. But a lot of times parents are trying to save money or time or whatever, and they're holding back on the visits until the student makes some decisions as far as what they're looking for. And my thought is, what is your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a bad idea for all the reasons you listed. I think realistically, I totally appreciate and understand that not everyone has the wherewithal to go and visit tons of schools. So I think being really thoughtful about some of those elements up front and trying to identify some schools, doing the local visits if you have schools in your area, so that the student can at least start to get the way you put it, a baseline is good. The biggest mistake that I think a family can make is waiting to visit schools until after decisions are in. I do have families who will say that, well, we're going to visit when we find out where she gets in. Well, the bad part about that is that a school can look absolutely perfect on paper, but in reality could just not feel like a fit. And similarly, a school could seem like it doesn't really seem to make sense for me. I mean, they have what I want, but they don't have this. But maybe we should go and take a look. And I have had students come back and say, I really didn't think I was going to like this school, but it was awesome. And, I think I might actually want to apply early and commit because it just feels like the perfect place for me. And those moments don't happen unless you visit. So somewhere between visiting every single school the student has ever considered or heard of and visiting no schools until the student has decisions in hand, there's got to be a happy medium. And you've just got to figure out what that is for your family. And, I always push it to the student. If I'm, as the parent, I would say, we have a budget of X and we can spend exactly a week and a half. So maybe we can spend 7 days going to look at schools, and I'm willing to make one trip where we drive farther than 2 hours away, like whatever it is that the family has decided. And then say to the student, where do you want to visit? And requiring as a parent the student to have some good reasons why they want to see those schools beyond just, well, so-and-so's boyfriend goes there and he really likes it. So I think it might be a good choice for me.
Right. I think that I would agree with that. So I'm noticing here we're running out of time. So can you tell us a little bit more about your company and what you do and how we might be able to contact you?
Absolutely. Well, my company is called College Coach, as you know, and one of the great things about us and one of the things that really does set us apart is that every person who does what I do at College Coach is a former admissions officer. So we have people who've worked at Harvard and Yale and Georgetown and Barnard and University of Chicago, Occidental, a wide variety of colleges, and we've all been decision makers. And so that makes us fairly uniquely qualified to help students really understand how colleges are looking at applications and how to put their best foot forward in their applications. We have a great website with a wonderful blog and all kinds of information, and you can take a look at all the different people who do this work, and that's at getintocollege.com. So getintocollege, all one word, .com is a great place to go to learn more about what we're all about. We also do, actually, I host a radio show on Voice America called Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We've been doing that for about a year now. And we have lots of great advice about applying to college and understanding the process. And that airs every week on Thursdays, although you can go to the Voice America website and check that out anytime that you want. But, if you're a family and you're looking for assistance with this process, it's a great place to go. You also might check with your company's benefits department. One of the things that is also unique about College Coach is that there are a lot of companies out there who purchase our services and offer them as a free benefit to their employees. And so you may not be aware, but we might be doing webinars and offering one-on-one appointments and essay review and helping put together college lists. And that might be something you can access for free. So check that out from your benefits department.
Wow. Okay, so a lot of great information. I will put links to everything you mentioned in our show notes so that people can go to our website and get all the latest things. So if you're driving, you don't need to stop. You can just hit the show notes. This is a lot of great information, and I feel like we just scratched the surface. So maybe we'll have to have you on again. But I appreciate all this great information.
Absolutely, Brett. I would love to come back, and I would agree. We kind of just scratched the surface. So anytime, I'm happy to come back.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right, that was a great interview. Hopefully you learned a ton from Elizabeth. I really appreciate her sharing her insight and knowledge. But before I let you go, I wanted to talk a little bit more about visit and visit planning. We alluded to it in the interview, but I just wanted to kind of hit home in that families really do need to understand and build some sort of visit plan. For a lot of families, we're going to try to do the visits in the junior year of high school and try and do it while school's in session and we're able to actually see what's going on at the individual colleges. So in an ideal situation, you would do quite a lot of preliminary visits in your junior year. Now, for some families, that might be 2 or 3 local visits and choose a local college and you're done. So maybe near the end of your junior year. For other families, you might need to be doing some road trips, going out to the Ivy League and looking there, or going out to Stanford, or going to some of their competitors, the Rice or Notre Dame's or University of Chicago. So they're all over the country, some of these schools. So a lot of families might need to plan some road trips. And when you start talking about getting the family organized and off to a trip that may include plane tickets, etc., you need some advanced planning. So in order to get that done, that means you may need to start planning your visits early in your junior year so that you can execute later in your junior year. So what does that mean? Well, some tidbits here. Plan your vacation at the same time your students are off. So if you've got a teacher in-service day or end of semester or whatever reasons that students might have off at the high school, that might be a great time to visit. A lot of students do not want to miss too much of their school time. So if you take a day off of work on the same Friday that they have off, and again, you may not even know what you're going to do on that Friday, just schedule it off in advance so that as that comes closer, you can say, all right, we've decided this is a school we want to investigate, and then you can plan a trip as far as the specifics later. But if you have an important meeting or other things scheduled on that day, it can make life a little more challenging. The same thing with spring break. Spring break for high schools often does not coincide with spring break for college. So that's another opportunity where maybe mom and dad take a few of those days or that whole week off and you use that time to visit some colleges. So that's part of the process. And then determining how much you're willing to spend and how far and wide you're willing to go and how many visits is enough visits for your particular student. Some families I've talked to have visited 10, 12, 15 schools. Other families I work with, they only visit 3 or 4. And there's no right or wrong. It's just trying to figure out what's right or wrong for your family and your student. So again, that's my 2 cents on visits. I just wanted to put that out there and make it, give you a little additional information. I appreciate you listening out there, and we'll see you again next week. Please give us a review or pass this along to anybody that you feel would benefit from this type of podcast. And again, we can be reached at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. I appreciate any reviews in iTunes, and that's all for this week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.